Storage Wars always seems like a simple show. People came to auctions, placed bids, argued, found strange and valuable things. Excitement, laughter, light drama, the perfect format for an evening in front of the TV. But behind this picture was something viewers were never told about. At first, it looked like coincidence. One participant fell ill, another suddenly disappeared, a third died in a tragic accident. But as the seasons went on, more and more fans began to ask, why is it that in Storage Wars there are so many deaths? Why did the fates of the show's brightest stars end so abruptly? Television knows how to hide things. The cameras turn off, and with them, the truth disappears. We never see what happens after filming. No one shows the road home, the silence behind a closed door, the call to an ambulance. It was there, off-screen, where the scariest episodes played out. Strokes, accidents, illnesses, and sometimes death. Fans began talking about the Storage Wars curse. Too many coincidences, too many tragedies, too much silence that no one could shout over. One by one, participants left, and it was as if the very list of names lived a life of its own. Today, we will remember them all, and we'll start with the story of the man whose loud "yoop" was once the symbol of the show, and later became the echo of his struggle for his own life. His "yoop" became the calling card of the show. Dave Hester was the man who turned an ordinary auction into a real spectacle. He argued, irritated rivals, provoked storms of emotion, and it was precisely for this that viewers adored him. But behind the screen was a far more dangerous drama. In 2012, Hester blew up the entire project, claiming that the lockers in Storage Wars were staged. He sued and was kicked off the show. But producers quickly realized, without him, there was no nerve, and they brought him back. It seemed like he had won his war. But in 2014, Dave collapsed. Doctors diagnosed a stroke, bleeding in the brain. The cause, high blood pressure and sleep disruption. Yesterday, he was loudly bidding on screen, and the next day, he could no longer move or speak. Doctors doubted he would survive. Dave managed to come back, but that same "yoop" never sounded the same again. Viewers began to ask themselves, why is Storage Wars turning into a field of tragedies where even the loudest voices nearly fall silent forever? Barry Weiss. Barry was always special, a collector, a jokester, a charismatic biker in stylish glasses. For fans, he was not just a participant, he was the mascot of the show. But one day, the mascot became a target. 2019, Los Angeles. His motorcycle collides with a car pulling out of a parking lot. The impact was so strong that Barry's body literally folded together with the bike. What followed? Resuscitation, the intensive care unit, severe chest injuries, fractures, internal damage. He was a step away from never getting up again. Barry survived, but he came back different. Where once there had been carefree jokes and light sarcasm, there was now a pause. His eyes were no longer the eyes of a man for whom risk was a game, because he knew the stake might not be money, but life. And sometimes a single missed breath can cost everything. Fans were happy that Barry lived, but it was after this accident that many first thought, what if all the glitter of Storage Wars cost its participants more than they were willing to admit? Dan Dotson. He spoke so fast it seemed like time itself was trying to catch up with him. But one night, time decided to play against him. First, strange questions in his sleep. In the morning, double vision. He decided it was nothing. A shower, a step out of the bathroom, collapse, silence. Laura, his wife, screamed into the phone to 911 and did the impossible. She resuscitated her own husband. Later, doctors would say two words that made hands go cold. Double aneurysm. 2 bombs in the head and both already ticking. The chance of survival was too small for anyone to bet on an auction. But Laura bet on him and won. An 8-hour surgery, hospital lights, the smell of antiseptic, and the first deal Dan made after his return. I'm quitting smoking, forever. And he really did come back. The same voice, the same speed, the same sold. But now, viewers heard something else. In every word, there was an echo of that night. And with each episode came the lingering question: how many more times can his heart withstand this rhythm? The tragedy of Kenny Crossley, which no one could believe. Why Kenny? Why the man who was the very smile of Storage Wars found dead in his own home? How could someone who seemed the most alive on screen just be gone? Kenny was the heart of the show. His laughter drowned out the bidding, his phrases became memes, his lightness made the atmosphere brighter. Before TV, he worked in security, then ran a vintage store, and suddenly became a true star, known across America. Everything about him said life was just beginning. But in March 2024, that life ended. 55 years old, far too early, far too unexpected. He was found dead in his Los Angeles apartment. No warning signs, no public complaints about health. One day, and it was over. The more people talked about his death, the fewer explanations there were. Different versions flickered in the news: stroke, heart attack, chronic illness, but none were ever confirmed. There is no official answer. Only silence remains, and it now sounds louder than Kenny's laughter. And that silence raises a new question. Was his departure really an accident? Daryl the Gambler, a legendary man, someone who never feared risking it all on one bid. His name in the show is tied to one of its loudest moments. In 2012, he bought a locker that turned out to contain a true treasure, a collection of paintings by artist Frank Gutierrez worth nearly $300,000. That day made him a hero, a man who proved that in Storage Wars, you could find the kind of wealth you dream of your whole life. But in 2019, reality dealt him a blow he never expected. Daryl wrote on social media, "I had a double heart attack. Doctors say I barely survived." In a single second, the daring gambler found himself face to face with the scariest game of all, the game against his own life. He underwent surgery, stent placement, a long rehabilitation, and through it all, one question hung over him: would the next attack be the last? Fans saw him differently, stooped, tired, changed. And that's when his nickname, the Gambler, took on a frightening double meaning. Once it was about risking money on lockers, but now it was about a man who once bet everything against death. And won, for now. But what if the game isn't over? What if the next card in fate's hand is the last? And why do the brightest Storage Wars participants find themselves again and again on the edge between life and death? Gunter Nejeda. Gunter became part of Storage Wars later than many, but he immediately won viewers' attention. His German accent, easy charisma, and genuine sense of humor made him one of the most memorable participants. He worked alongside his son, René, and their duo always gave the show a special flavor. But in 2023 came news that shocked fans. Gunter died of lung cancer. The disease progressed quickly, and despite treatment, he could not be saved. He was only 67 years old. The blow was especially hard for his son, René, who for years had joined him at the auctions and shared the screen. Fans wrote that their favorite father and son duo made the show more humane, warmer, and that is why Gunter's death was such a bitter reminder. Even the most cheerful and lively faces of Storage Wars are not immune to tragedy. Now their shared episodes are rewatched with a different feeling. Where once there was lightness and laughter, now there is silence.
Morris Mo Prigov was one of the most обычные characters in Storage Wars. A surgeon by profession, he came to the show as a collector of antiques and art. His style was unique: bright clothes, a signature hat, and endless optimism. Mo didn't just bid, he turned every purchase into a little history lesson, explaining to viewers why even a plain item could have value. But behind the scenes, his life was coming to an end. In May 2021, it became known that Mo Prigov had died. He was 76. The cause was a serious illness that he battled until the end, but rarely spoke about publicly. His death shocked fans. Mo was one of those who embodied lightness and joy in the show, but it was his smile that disappeared forever. Colleagues remembered him as a man who could find value in everything, in objects and in people. Now his episodes are rewatched differently. Behind every joking comment, behind every bid, lies the memory of a man who is no longer there. Brandon Sheets grew up right on Storage Wars. The son of Daryl Sheets, he started as his father's helper, carrying boxes, learning how to bid, and gradually becoming an independent player. For many viewers, he symbolized that the show was not just about money, but about a family business passed from father to son. But in 2016, Brandon suddenly disappeared from the project. Producers didn't renew his contract, citing budget optimization. For fans, it sounded like mockery, a young man just starting his career thrown overboard. After leaving the show, his life changed. Instead of auctions, he went into real estate and later admitted on social media that leaving the show was painful. He felt thrown out of the world he grew up in. Many fans wrote that it was his sincerity that made Storage Wars more human, and without him, the show became something else. Brandon's tragedy is not in sudden death, but in having his future taken from him in front of millions of viewers. The man who was supposed to carry on his father's legend became a reminder that in Storage Wars it isn't family that matters, it's ratings. Laura Dodson was always next to Dan, partner, wife, co-host. Together, they were the face of the auction, a dynamic duo without which the show was unimaginable. But her name was tied to one of the darkest stories. In 2016, right during a backstage argument at an auction, an incident happened. Laura stabbed a colleague with a knife. The victim was taken to the hospital, and Laura ended up in police reports. For viewers used to seeing her smiling and charismatic, it was like thunder out of a clear sky. The incident was hushed up. Laura returned to the show as if nothing had happened, but the rumors remained. And now, every time she led the bidding, people inevitably recalled the story that nearly claimed another participant's life. Why did the smiling auction lady end up at the center of Takova Grim episode? And how many other secrets does the backstage of Storage Wars hide? Mark Balello was one of the most charismatic Storage Wars participants. Known by the nickname Rico Suave, stylish, confident, with wads of cash ready to outbid anyone. He added the very boldness that made auctions so entertaining. But in February 2013, his life ended tragically. He was found dead in his own car, parked in the garage of his company, Balello Inc., in Simi Valley. Cause of death, carbon monoxide poisoning. He was only 40. 2 days earlier, he had been arrested for meth possession. Court awaited him in a couple of weeks. Pressure, problems, fear, and a sudden end that still raises more questions than answers. Fans also remembered Mark for another story. In 2011, he discovered among his purchased items the legendary Action Comics #1, the first comic book appearance of Superman. Its value nearly $1 million. Mark returned it to its rightful owner, Nicolas Cage, and newspapers called him an honest hero. But just a year later, that hero was dead. How could a man who returned the world's symbol of hope end up without hope himself? Was it an accident, despair, or something more? Storage Wars was always advertised as a simple show: auctions, lockers, excitement, fun bidding, unexpected finds, emotions meant to stay light. But reality turned out far heavier. Behind every laugh and shout na auctions hid real tragedies that TV cameras preferred not to show. the death of Gunter Nijoda from lung cancer, the last days of Mo Prigov, who fought illness but didn't want to show weakness, the sudden passing of Kenny Crossley, found dead in his own home, the tragic end of Mark Balello, poisoned by carbon monoxide in his car, Dave Hester's stroke, Daryl Sheets' heart attack, Barry Weiss's terrible accident. Even for those who survived, this show became something more than auctions. It became a mark. Television has always known how to stay silent. Problems are never shown on screen. Everything that doesn't fit the entertainment show format is hidden backstage. But the longer the silence lasts, the louder the question sounds. What really happens to the people who step into the spotlight of those cameras? Maybe it's ordinary exhaustion and illnesses that can strike anyone. Maybe it's the cost of stress, constant pressure and performance for the public. Or maybe, and here lies the scariest version, storage wars really did become a curse. There is always something in a locker that even the buyer doesn't expect. Sometimes it's old photos, sometimes letters, sometimes something that carries someone else's pain. Fans whisper about the storage wars curse. But if the curse is real, who cast it? And most importantly, why? So that the show always remains in the shadow of tragedies, so that we never learn what really happens behind the scenes. And here lies the main question that remains after all these stories. What if the next storage door opened on camera doesn't mark the start of another show, but the end for the one who opens it?